Welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. Our top law enforcement officer in Michigan, Attorney General Dana Nessel, revealed this week that one time her son was, quote, devastated when someone wished him a Merry Christmas at a store. Dana Nessel actually posted that on social media publicly for all the world to see. Let me ask you this. If you're a Christian and you go to a store and someone wishes you Happy Hanukkah, do you get offended? Maybe it's just me, but I say, okay, thanks, and I move on with my life. Not Dana Nessel, apparently. Being wished a Merry Christmas really burned her up and stuck with her all this time later. Nessel took time out of her busy day to respond to something President Trump said at a rally in Georgia. Remember when one of his campaign themes was that he was going to bring back saying Merry Christmas? It was his example of the culture war that continues to play out across America. So he brought that up again the other day. She wrote in response, quote, I remember the first time I was at a store with my son and an employee said Merry Christmas to us. My son looked devastated and asked, are we the only people who don't celebrate Christmas? I answered no, and we are just as American as everyone else. Glad Joe Biden knows that. Imagine being that emotionally fragile that is a real conversation for you. And I'm not talking about the kid, who she brought up, by the way. I'm talking about Dana Nessel, the adult. And now think about this is the person who is supposed to be staring down lawbreakers and evildoers in the state. Nessel wasn't done. She followed up, quote, saying happy holidays this time of year does not denigrate Christianity. It simply acknowledges and respects the great diversity of our nation and includes each and every one of us who call ourselves proud Americans. And you know what? Tolerating people saying Merry Christmas respects the traditions of our nation too. By the way, do you really think Dana Nessel considers herself a proud American? If leftists are so proud of America, why are they relentlessly tearing down our institutions, our economic system, our traditions? If you're proud of something, why do you want to fundamentally transform it? Governor Whitmer issued an extension this week to her pause on many aspects of her lives. That came as a surprise to no one. God forbid she releases a little bit of freedom and we can choose to sit in a restaurant. I went to the store the other day and it was packed. I mean, packed. Within my sight line, I could probably see 150 people. So that's okay. But sitting at tables in a restaurant 6 feet apart? No. Why? Science. Science, of course. Here's the governor on Monday.
And we've got to all do our part to protect one another until we eliminate COVID-19 once and for all.
So we've gone from we need 15 days to flatten the curve, that was 10 months ago, to this ambiguous statement, we all need to do our part until we eliminate COVID-19 once and for all. So now it needs to be eliminated? And is that even possible? Has a single reporter in Lansing asked the governor, what science are you following? Will you share it with us? How about some transparency? Or are they more interested in getting their invitation to the governor's holiday party? Governor Whitmer was asked about high school sports resuming, and here's how she and Health and Human Services Director Robert Gordon answered.
As a parent of a high schooler, I believe, and as the governor of Michigan, I believe, that our first priority should be getting students back in the classroom safely. That, I believe, is paramount. But I will hand it over to Director Gordon to talk a little bit more about how that re-engagement might look.
Yeah, just to add to what the governor said, the first priority is reopening high schools for education and sustaining that. I think when it comes to sports, there's a range of risk levels. And so at one end, you have kids, individual activities that are outdoors and where people are spaced out. At another level, you have contact sports outdoors. At another level, you have indoor contact sports. And as you go through those levels, the level of risk increases, and we have to think carefully about moving through them. So I will just leave it where the governor did, that our first priority, and also lower risk than a lot of those activities, is getting the schools open for education.
Did that give you any assurance at all that she has any idea how to get kids back in schools? During the campaign, she was hammering on President Trump for not having a federal strategy. She wanted him to figure out how to get kids in schools. It seems like that's her job because the needs of Michigan are very different from South Dakota or wherever else around the country. So instead of doing that, Governor Whitmer is now co-chair of Joe Biden's inaugural committee, the only governor to be chosen for that. Joining me now to discuss that is Executive Director of Michigan Rising Action, Tori Sachs. So, Tori, that seems like misplaced priorities, doesn't it?
I think her priorities have been misplaced this entire pandemic, Kyle, and thanks so much for having me on. At the beginning of this pandemic, Whitmer spent the last day, essentially, one of the last days that Michigan was open, campaigning for Joe Biden. We know now that her health department thought COVID was in the state at that time, and they kept it open. They let Joe Biden come in here and campaign. That was back in March. And now here we are 9 months later, and there's still not a plan for our children to go back to school. And even the CDC says that, keeping kindergarten through 12th graders in school should be the top priority. And it seems like it hasn't been a priority at all for Michigan. And I think it's disappointing, but I'm not surprised because her priorities have been on politics this entire year.
So, what is Michigan Rising Action doing about it?
Well, Kyle, we've started a petition, and thousands of people have signed it recently, telling Governor Whitmer to forego her taxpayer-funded salary until she prioritizes putting children back in school and opening up our economy. And folks can sign that. We'd love to have you join us at MichiganRisingAction.org. Again, that's MichiganRisingAction.org to sign our petition. And it's really gaining steam. We saw business owners across the state start to call for Whitmer to forgo her salary until they can do business, until their workers can work, and until our children can go back to school.
And I know you talk to a lot of people around the state, as I do. There is so much frustration because there seems like there is such a disconnect in Lansing, particularly with the Democrats, but I think with some Republicans as well, that it's like they're completely disconnected from the real world. And so when you shut down restaurants, for example, it's not just a matter of keeping people away from each other, even though, as I said earlier, I was in a store recently, and you could see, just looking around the store from where I was standing, you could see 150 people, not socially distanced, and all of that, and yet you can't go to a restaurant. And so it just seems to me like there's such a disconnect that they don't realize, the people in Lansing, Robert Gordon and Gretchen Whitmer and everyone else in Lansing, they don't realize when you close restaurants, you're ending jobs, you're suspending jobs, you're hurting families. What do you think it's going to take for them to finally start listening to people?
I think people have to continue to speak up. People have to continue to call the governor's office, to call their state representative, to call their state senator, but mostly their governor's office, and let them know what's happening to these people. Every time Whitmer says, I know what people are going through. No, she doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting $140,000 a year. She has a state paid house. All of these things that people don't have. We're now in the holiday season, and there's a lot of people. I worked at restaurants, for 10 years when I was starting my career, just on and off, and during college. And that's when we made our money, right? Was December, holiday parties, or people going out to dinner with their family because they don't want to cook before the holiday. And now you have a bunch of servers, cooks, hostesses, owners of restaurants who aren't going to be getting any money in December because of a state mandated shutdown. It's not fair. That's not the kind of country I thought we were living in.
Mm-hmm.
And it frankly needs to end. We saw the Supreme Court overturn her last executive orders, and I'm hoping we can see some sort of legal action that's fruitful in this endeavor as well.
Do you think that will happen? Because my perception of what happened was basically the court ruled those unconstitutional, but then the Health and Human Services Department just came right back with basically the same orders. And I know the Restaurant Association has fought them. Some private schools have fought them. But when do you think we will see any sort of legal recourse to those?
I mean, hopefully those cases keep moving, especially the schools case, as we get into January when schools will be open. The other thing I think that's not fair, and it's has been happening this entire pandemic, is Whitmer keeps, and as well as Gordon, they keep moving the goalpost,
Mm-hmm.
and they keep they're disingenuous, I think, with their orders as well, right? Because they did the 3-week pause most recently, and then they announced a 12-day extension. And at the press conference for the 12-day extension, Gordon, who is the MDHHS director, the guy who's making the orders now, who, by the way, is also advising the Biden transition for Health and Human Services. So it's lovely that Whitmer and Gordon both have time to be helping, Biden, one with his transition and then one with his inauguration while they're supposed to be fighting a pandemic. But then at that press conference announcing the 12-day extension, Gordon admitted, yeah, there's probably going to be businesses that have to be shut down past the 12 days. Well, if you keep moving the goalposts and you keep, people are trying to play by the rules. People understand that this virus is serious and that we need to do things to protect the people who are most at risk. But at the end of the day, they're not protecting the people most at risk, and they're moving the goalposts on everyone else, and they're being very disingenuous about what they're doing and why.
Well, and the way that they were viewing the extension, the 12-day extension, was that we need to see the impact of families getting together at Thanksgiving. Okay, so if that's how you're viewing it, then it's logical to think that there will be an extension beyond Christmas, because they'll want to see, how families were, not behaving during Christmas, and then the same thing with New Year's. And so it's very reasonable to see how these extensions and these lockdowns and shutdowns of restaurants and all of that, this could extend well into the new year. But unfortunately, we're out of time. Tori Sachs, give me one more time the website where people can go and sign the petition.
MichiganRisingAction.org, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter, MI Rising Action.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back.